Greetings to the Mercer Island School Board. Thank you for this opportunity to share a video about Mahlum's bond planning work for prioritized upgrades at the high school main campus and Crest Learning Center ahead of next week's board study session. My name is Becky Hutchinson, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Claudia Saunders.
Hello.
We are using this video as a means of sharing the details of our bond planning process and findings. We'll bring the same information to the board study session next week, but in a more summary form, which will allow us to use more time in person with you for questions and dialogue. Next slide. Through this presentation and next week's board study session, we endeavor to provide an update on the planning process to date, to share how the process uncovered diverse perspectives, and to provide clarifications on the identified needs and the process moving forward. Said simply, we want you to have transparency to our process. We want to collectively pause and reflect on what we've learned, and we want to confirm that we're on the right track. Next. So to achieve these outcomes, we're going to share the following: an overview of our process, how we've engaged, what we've learned, and where we're going. So next, let's get started. Process overview. Next, the work we started with your community in March of this year can be summarized as early planning for the building upgrades at Mercer Island High School and Crest Learning Center that will result in prioritized recommendations to you, the school board, for a planned 2025 capital construction bond. We are achieving this by engaging with your students, staff, administration, and community, by uncovering the space needs throughout the school, by exploring a variety of potential options for building improvements. And to be clear, we are focusing on the renovation of existing spaces without adding building additions. And we are prioritizing needs without committing to resolve all of the identified needs through the 2025 bond. And we understand that will be for ongoing discussion with you. So from the outset, we communicated our goal as identifying targeted building renovations that will maximize positive academic and social impact to the student experience. Now, we have further refined that language through our engagement work and partnership with the high school community, and that's what you'll see in our share today. Next. Here is a process map that shows how we get to our finish line, which, as we know, is putting a bond to your voters in April of 2025. For that, in working backwards, we must finalize our recommendations to you in November of this year. We're organizing ourselves and our work in 3 phases. The phase that we've been in is gathering. Over the summer, we'll be moving into testing. And in the fall, when people return, we will be prioritizing. So next, to show you a little bit about what each of these phases means, this gathering phase is really looking at and asking who is Mercer Island High School and Crest and what do they care about. We've been uncovering what their needs and wants are, and we've been asking how can we harmonize the perspectives, wants, and needs. The process we've been going through is asking lots of questions, listening. We've been on site to observe, and we've been sharing back to all the groups that we've been meeting with. And the outcome of this phase is the co-creation of a community upheld vision and guiding principles, an understanding of utilization, building utilization, so that we are able to quantify opportunity spaces. And we've been generating a clear needs list, and from those needs, a menu of potential strategies to address them. Next, the groups with whom we've been working are organized as such. First, we have our leadership team. The purpose of the leadership team is in Those who are joining us there, as you see in the members below, school principal, administrators, facilities and operations leadership, as well as Superintendent Rundle. And they are really providing, insights and helping us kind of create and guide the process that will ultimately lead to the recommendations in November. Next, we have a school design, guidance, and evaluation team, which we fondly shorthand to the GET. As you can see in the member breakdown here, we have a diversity of voices, including students, staff, administrators, and parents. And this group was intentionally brought together to be a diverse representation of individuals who are connected to multiple networks of the Mercer Island community. And their role is really to guide and evaluate all that we have been collecting and really help us make meaning. They are lending their voice to this prioritization as we are understanding the needs and opportunities of the building facilities. And finally, the largest sphere here is the entire school community. We have been outreaching and engaging to them through multiple avenues. And Claudia is going to show you more in depth what that process looks like. The purpose here is to reach everybody, give everyone an opportunity to have their voices heard, their perspectives shared and represented, and to make sure that we are understanding and honoring the community values on the campus. Next. Through our work with these groups, we have refined a project vision, and that is to create a student-centric, flexible school that fosters belonging, drives innovation, and removes barriers to learning. Next, to dig into a further level of detail, we've set 4 guiding principles, and these have come strategically out of the GET. The guiding principles are how we know that we're staying on course toward our vision. They are really the foundational values that help us evaluate the complex variables and that will ultimately guide our recommendations that you'll see in November. Those, in summary, are to encourage personalized passions and interests, to create community and foster belonging through relationships, to prioritize holistic health and sustainable comfort, and to embrace innovation and dynamic evolution. Next. Now, as mentioned, a critical step in this gathering process has been to understand how and where learning is happening today. And that's what this diagram helps to break down, using color to code the types of activities, educational activities that are happening in each of your spaces. And in looking at that and what proportions of the day are actually being used for these activities, we are able to right-size how many of these spaces are needed as we project into the future. Next slide, we look at what it would mean to plan for a school that supports a student enrollment of 1,400 with updated and tuned numbers of for utilization and students per classroom that really looks at how the building operates today, as well as forecasting into how we want it to operate tomorrow. And the results of that is that we are able to repurpose 3 to 5 teaching stations. And as we study opportunities to meet the needs, have the opportunity to put those to other uses, as in they are not needed in the daily utilization for the 1,400 student count. Next. Now, a high-level look at the needs. Through our collection and analysis process, we've organized them into 5 categories. So in summary, those categories are restricted program potentials, unmet program demands, safety, utilization, and access constraints, siloed spaces and hidden opportunities, and inflexible, inefficient, and antiquated learning environments. We understand those needs, and through that work, we have been able to identify potential projects that can help us overcome the needs and actually bring a better learning environment that meets those guiding principles to the Mercer Island community. So this is a summary list that I won't read here, but a preview of what we will get into later in this presentation. Next. So as you see in summary, that is the work of our gathering phase. And at the end of this process, which really is culminated and are shared to you, it feels like we have left no stone unturned. So that is going to launch us into our summer work, which is when we get to begin testing. And the intent of that is to really clarify the potential project scope and to marry that to cost. So we're going to be doing a lot of testing to see what makes sense to put together out of that potential project list and to really analyze the impact of those opportunities in order to find some viable options. Next. And finally, in summary, the work of ourselves with the school community in the fall will be to evaluate, prioritize, and ultimately get to that recommendation. So by that time, we will have refined our options. And very importantly, we will have reached consensus with the school design guidance and evaluation team really at the core of that work with us. Next, Claudia is going to take us into more depth to look at how we've engaged.
All right, thanks, Becky. So, like Becky mentioned, we've done a lot of work in this gathering phase, and we're going to look at that in finer grain detail. So, Becky shared with you the outcomes of a lot of that work, and this is how we got there. So, to kick off all of the work, we started with our first GET meeting. So, you can see that here outlined in that orange circle. And the outcome of this first meeting is represented on this page. So, we did a visual listening exercise where we learned through their words and through the images that they selected how they see the Mercer Island High School and Crest community and what makes it so special. And at the center of this board, we see bare feet. They're stepping into running water. And this really captured the spirit of many of the comments that we heard, that a school is a place for students to feel like they can safely take risks and expose themselves to new ideas and undiscovered passions. We also took the time to learn about the identities that we all hold who were in the room and to recognize that some voices and some perspectives might not be there. So while we were really intentional to work with Principal Wold to build this GET community, there were still folks that aren't represented every day. And one of the activities that we did was take the time to recognize that those voices were not there, to name them and to include them in our conversations. So we have named those personas. They're Robin, Aiden, Max, and Hannah, and they remind us in every one of our GET meetings of these perspectives, especially of your younger classmen who are not in our GET, which is a really cool insight to hear from them. From there, we jumped off into this rich outreach journey. So we went along, started with the GET, got to know a little bit about the community. And the very first step outside of that was a site walk with some of the leadership teams. So this was with Clay and Tony. They walked us through the school. We also had a walk with Principal Wold. And here in the big yellow letters, you see some of the recurring conversation points that had come up through those walks. So we talked about safety, consistency or the lack of consistency, utilization of spaces, how the building is cared for, maintained, and really what's getting a lot of use. And also this idea of dignity had come up in our walk with your leadership team. So the orange talk boxes, you're going to see these recurring graphics throughout this section. So those orange talk boxes are highlighting the things that are working really well. And here we could see that in general, these buildings are really well maintained and respected. But the top of mind was this yellow box here, and that was safety. And while this is an open and porous campus in a safe community, safety is still a concern. The health room in particular for both the main campus and Crest was one of those issues. And for students in crisis, there's not currently a dignified nor safe way to receive the care that they need. And it was just one of those things that came up in the walk here. It also came up when we talked to the counselors. So that idea of safety was one that kept floating to the top. The dark gray boxes here are challenging or highlighting some of the challenges within the space. So during this walk was the first time that we started to hear about the competing pressures of wanting to have these diverse, specialized spaces and the tendency to maybe cater too much to a particular program or individual at the expense of utilization or flexibility in the future. From there, we did a session with the Student Senate. And some of the recurring ideas that came up from this group was the idea of belonging, the sense of flexibility, access to spaces and to each other and to teachers. The idea of comfort came up a lot, and also a desire to have connection with nature. So here we see right at the top of the list is the importance of variety and diversity in the resources and clubs that are available to the school. This is one of the things that the students felt is working exceptionally well. And it's through these flexible offerings that they're able to find peers and nurture that sense of belonging. And then they use those nooks in the hallway and they use those library booths as places to be able to connect with their community. What they're hoping to find are really more comfortable areas to connect and work to connect and work, either alone, in groups, or with their teachers. And here was the first time that we heard students advocate for better environments for their teachers, and we thought that was really striking. They described the need. They described needing spaces that felt welcoming and safe, not intimidating, like walking into a room with a bunch of teachers who will kind of turn and look at them, or being alone, quote, in a room with no windows. So it was really interesting to see that they recognize that relationship as a critical part of their learning journey. Um, and also in this, the students were able to identify some of the pressures of a building that is starting to wear or was designed in a different era. Things like the size and the quality of the common space, those narrower hallways can feel really crowded. The fact that there is not enough gender inclusive spaces for this community, just to name a couple of those that floated to the top. From there, we followed it up with a conversation with the Parent Advisory Committee, or the PAC. And the discussion points that came up with this group really centered around, again, that sense of belonging, community, the quality of space, what makes something feel welcoming to them as a parent or a caregiver, and the sense of display. And while the questions that we asked the parents were slightly different for this group, you get a sense of what's working and what's missing. And so it struck us what an intimate community the Mercer Island and Crest parent population is, that people are drawn from far and wide to be a part of that. We heard about people moving across the country so their children could attend Mercer Island schools, and that those relationships that start early on have lasted for generations. Um, but we also heard that there's limited spaces where families are invited into the school, and there was a desire to invest in those spaces where parents felt like it was appropriate for them to be. So this group was able to point out the importance of the perception of a space that matches the quality and ability of the students' work to be able to showcase their talent and the hard work of the students. So this is where things like um, the Performing Arts Center or spaces that could support the clubs and athletics really floated to the top, because those were areas where parents felt like they could be welcomed into the school. And then from there, we also had a survey that was simultaneously going along this journey with us. We talked to um, students while that was going on and left boards there for them to leave us their feedback. And they did. We asked them questions around what was working, what doesn't work, and some new ideas for the school. They sketched for us, they left us notes, they left us stories. And some of the things that we learned from that was things that were working was the student lounge at Crest. So that, again, that space where students can kind of softly, comfortably be themselves. And in the high school, those classrooms with windows really felt great to them. What wasn't working was that sense of lack of comfort, that sense of wear that we talked about before. So the broken water fountains or the bathrooms that are not accessible for all. The sense of flow was one that came up around parking, arrival, and just navigating the crowded hallways. and some of the missing program spaces like the drama and black box. And then some of the ideas that came forward was some ideas around sustainability, those soft, relaxing spaces, some cool technology things like animatage tables or esports arenas. And it had come up, I think it was the drama teacher that had mentioned this idea for mentorship or connection with the middle school. And so we are excited to explore opportunities there. And then we did a walk. We walked and stopped to talk to teachers from the different departments you see represented along our journey here. And they gave us some really great insights. We've learned through them the various different ways that hands-on classes are a big draw, especially coming out of COVID, and they are growing. But things that are hands-on or classes that are hands-on come with a lot of things, and trying to accommodate the variety of all the things that they're doing, the diversity of their course catalog in these singular spaces can come with challenges, especially around safety and access. Who can use it, when they can use it, what certifications need to be required in order for teachers or students to be in that space was things that we heard, whether it was in the science rooms or in the art rooms, the tech spaces, that idea of the specialized and who can be there and when. Um, some of the limited flexibility, either because the furniture just didn't let them use the space they really wanted to, storage was limited, or just the demands of the schedule, they can't leave things out, or they don't have space uh, to kind of leave work in progress. And then lastly, we heard about some of the qualities of space that are just less desirable. They're the ones that don't have daylight, where there's challenges with temperature control, or that they're hidden behind these solid walls. So it's difficult to supervise. And even though there are these great resources right nearby, they don't feel like it's appropriate to let students be in that space because they can't have that sight line there. In addition, we had a survey. So that survey went out to students, it went to staff, it went to family caregivers, as well as the athletics clubs and boosters, and for a total of 68 responses. Within that survey, what we learned was there's a lot of unique opportunities that set the foundation of what makes Mercer Island High School and Crest a desirable and special place. So um, it's we kept hearing in a variety of ways that it's a small school district that has all these opportunities that you'd expect to find in a much bigger ecosystem. But what's missing is a way to connect some of these linked opportunities, to connect and link the opportunities that they do offer and share them outside and beyond the walls of the school. Um, so we did ask all of the groups, we asked all of the groups questions around project goals. And we were able to see some of these emerging themes that had reinforced what we'd been hearing as we were walking the school, talking to students, and talking to parents. And many of the ideas focused on how to center student needs to provide both safe and challenging avenues to explore and develop the hard and soft skills to be able to innovate and thrive in whatever their unique futures take them. So that was a really cool takeaway from the project goals. And like I said, these were questions, themes of questions that we asked to all of the different groups. We asked all of the groups as well about school culture and community. And these comments also reinforce what we've been hearing in the conversations as we walked through the school about the importance of having and finding a community, being it, and we found that many of them found it through academics, athletics, clubs, and just the sheer fact that Mercer Island is a big neighborhood. People were able to find that sense of community. And we've highlighted here in the center a comment from a parent that underscores why they chose and continue to choose Mercer Island, that they're invested in the community and they believe in quality public education. And that was just a really cool takeaway, that those that are part of this community are here because they choose to be. And then the last question that focused on program need really only went to the teachers and the coaches. Here we see how space is hindering program growth, and there are specific issues that they experience in the day-to-day of trying to do their work. So the issues that we heard were coming back to supervision. We heard issues around acoustics, as well as the space constraints, not enough space for the robotics to work, or the idea that they can't leave those projects out, things like that. And then they also, like the students advocated for the teachers advocated for their students and saying, you know, they have really limited spaces to go during their free period. And so they are invited into the classrooms during those teachers' prep periods. So those students have a place to go and a place to be during that off time. So it's really cool to see that they advocated for each other in that way. So all of this to say, we had a really wonderful and insightful, intense engagement and outreach journey. And this was a quote from Principal Wold that he shared during the meeting with the parents at the PAC. And this is the idea that belonging has been a part of every conversation throughout this entire gathering phase. And we have continued to hear it come up through the work we've done with the GET. And that's what I'm going to show you in these next couple of slides. So I already shared with you what happened in the first get. In the second get, we asked the community to imagine a future learning environment and what are the spaces, the people, the resources that communicate this ideal learning environment. And they link together the reciprocal relationship of belonging and innovation and how those two ideas feed and augment one another. They told us where they'd want to go. They'd want to be in spaces that were comfortable and welcoming, a little whimsical. They'd want to feel like they had the opportunity to personalize and that they connect with each other and with the outdoors. We asked them what they would find and what they would do. And they shared how they would collaborate in groups, how they would come together spontaneously, about how they would be able to display their passions, because that would then feed that next level of finding your people and how you could innovate. And then we asked them what they do. And they shared with us through the imagery and through their words how they would build their community, how they would create this open and creative mindset, and be able to take a break to prepare themselves for the next flurry of innovation that they were going to step into. From all of that work, we started to develop the guiding principles, the vision and the guiding principles. And here we were starting to tease apart the tensions that we'd heard around the needs, um, to ensure that no matter where we go and what we do, that we're creating a healthy balance between the desire of the individual to support themselves and the collective to come together, the desire for novelty and innovation, and the need for comfort. And all of these foundational values are what we are using to help evaluate the complex variables and guiding our recommendations. So Becky had shared those with you at the top, and I'm going to share them again with a little bit more detail, understanding that the goal here was intentionally putting these tensions um, away from each other so we were able to find that support and say, no matter where we go, we're not biasing it too strong one way or the other. So here we see that we are to create that student-centric, flexible school that fosters belonging, drives innovation, and removes barriers to learning, that encourage personalized passions and interest. They helped us write the subtext, and you didn't see this earlier before. So here in their personalized passions and interests, they are creating environments where individuals with diverse voices feel empowered and supported to explore and develop their unique interests and passions. And that comes as a counterpoint to creating community and fostering belonging through relationships. So, to foster belonging by creating community where everybody feels genuinely welcomed, valued, and accepted. And the most important part is they're working towards something bigger than ourselves. That those two opposite points of novelty and comfort, we are embracing innovation and dynamic evolution. We are going to meet the emerging transformational opportunities and navigate the uncertainty that comes with the unknown with creativity, flexibility, and synergy. And we're going to prioritize holistic health and sustainable comfort to create spaces that energize and sustain student well-being, promote an interconnectedness between the students and the natural environment. So these are the guiding principles with their subtext, and they helped us write this language. With that in mind, we hopped into an evaluation of the needs to discuss potential and isolated projects through these various lenses. And we asked them to do a really hard thing. We asked them to choose some of their priorities and have a really robust conversation around why, how it relates to their respective groups that they are responsible for sharing back to, but also checking that against some of the guiding principles. And this helped us inform the pairings, which we will show you in a little while. So that was a very deep dive in how we got here.
Thanks, Claudia. So I'm going to pick this up now and bring us to what we've learned. And how this is different is us now looking at really the physical implications of everything that Claudia, that we collected through the work that Claudia just shared. You'll notice here that we have actually tuned the language. As before, with these 5 colors and 5 categories, we were describing the needs. So really, what are the deficiencies that were being highlighted by your community? Well, here we're talking about how we're going to actually address those needs, overcome them, get the facility to work in support of that project vision and guiding principles. And so as we step in and show you what the project opportunities are looking like, we're going to now talk about them in terms of meeting program demands, meeting or finding learning potential, creating safe, accessible, utilized and resource spaces, how we're going to unlock previously hidden opportunities, and how we're going to maximize our learning settings. So next. So organized in these 5 categories, we're going to share to you some high-level observations of how this is occurring in your spaces, and then we'll take you through a walkthrough the different potential projects that we've identified. So in this first category of meeting program demands, the observations that we can draw in looking at where this is occurring or where the opportunities are occurring are really in the specialty spaces. You can see highlighted here the spaces in the 500 wing for your art classrooms. You can see the career and college ready spaces, the special education spaces, and the athletic and physical education spaces. You'll also see outside lots of comments about parking and some of the ways that feeling the constrictions of that disrupting the patterns and activities of the student body. When you go to the next slide, we start to look at what specific projects are going to help us get and meet those program demands. So in the teaching spaces, some potentials would be to expand the broadcast studio, to reconfigure the special education spaces to provide more accessible support services, to reconfigure and expand the art studios and storage, to expand the STEM and robotics space, and to expand and upgrade the student store. At Crest, we're looking at a need to renovate and expand the science room. In administration, we're focused on expanding career counseling. With athletics, we're looking at expanding the athletic training room, reconfiguring gymnastics vault, expanding the auxiliary gym to accommodate spectators. And in the support category, we're looking at a need to expand instrument storage, expand the kitchen and servery, and the potential to add more parking. As you can see illustrated by the photos here, this is, and as you'll see replicated for each of these 5 categories, coming out of the process that Claudia just took us through. And, you know, in particular, the walks through the schools, the observations and the interviews that we had with staff, student, and administrative voices. Next slide. As we look at the next category, we're looking at how to really counteract or overcome the needs of, program demands that are currently being unmet. And so here we're looking at how to really help the facility allow your learning spaces to reach and those using them to reach their potential. What this diagram is showing us is that this is really getting at spaces that are missing. They don't yet exist. They don't have a home either at your main campus or Crest. And so this is where the outcomes of that utilization work and the potential to actually reclaim spaces, maybe even some that were teaching spaces but aren't needed going forward, and dedicating, putting that space towards some of these unmet needs. Next slide. We see what some of these potential projects could be. We heard in the category of teaching spaces an ask to add a student-run credit union, an ask to add a black box classroom, an ask for outdoor access in Riku firing space for the ceramics class, and dedicated classroom space for the physical education program. At Crest, we heard an ask for a second greenhouse and the associated outdoor space to support those classroom activities. In administration, an ask to reconfigure those teacher offices and support spaces, really tapping back to what Claudia mentioned, which is this is not necessarily just coming from teachers, but also an ask from the students to have consistent, reliable, and safe spaces where they can connect with staff. At the club level, an ask to add competition space for the robotics club, and adding shared learning and small group spaces that everyone has access to, where students can do small group and independent work, as well as student work showcase spaces. So what we're really tapping into here is how do we create opportunities for programs or activities that don't currently exist on your campus. On the next slide, we move into our category of how to counteract issues brought up around safety, utilization, and access constraints. And to do that, we're going to create spaces or improve spaces to be more safe, accessible, better utilized, and better resourced. Now, what you can see from how it maps on the buildings right now is that we're talking about your common spaces and how students, the spaces that students use to get around your building, how they're moving through your campus and trying to make connections. So when you go to the next slide, the projects that we're identifying to do this work in the teaching spaces category would be to connect the radio station to an adjacent classroom and expand studio capabilities, because right now those are separated across a hallway. To upgrade science classrooms and specifically the safety features within them, and to improve the workshop and storage solutions at the Performing Arts Center, which have gotten very creative with where and how they're storing all of the props and tools and resources needed to run those programs. At Crest, we're looking at the need to add a secured vestibule, add accessible parking stalls, and to renovate the health room and reconfigure the pantry. Or excuse me, access to the pantry. In the administrative wing at the main campus, a need to reconfigure the counseling offices and the nurse office and adjacent health room, really getting at that issue of dignity, that the theme of dignity that Claudia brought up before, how students have safe and private access to have their health needs met. In athletics, the feedback that we heard really is around the locker rooms and the team rooms. Specifically, there's a lack of storage, and the current configuration of having gendered spaces has made the ability to access those spaces, or the need to sometimes lock down those spaces due to the staffing arrangements, challenging for the students and those program operations. In common spaces, we are hearing a need to focus on and find improvements to, in general, just how to circulate through the main building. That could be anything from, are there accessible ramps connecting all the hallways? Sometimes hallways like between the 500 and 400 don't have an interior connection. And so students are frustrated by how to safely navigate between those areas, as well as at a really interesting conversations around the commons itself and the feelings that students have about being in that space, the scale of the space, and only one type of seating furniture solution there makes the space challenging for a lot of students to feel comfortable and safe in. And also in general, the arrangement of gendered bathrooms throughout the building, has been identified by students and staff alike as not meeting the privacy and inclusion needs of the high school body. We can go to the next category. We are talking about how to really overcome spaces that are feeling and programs that are feeling siloed or hidden. And so what we're looking to do here is find solutions or potential projects that will really unlock opportunities that have previously felt hidden. And what you can see here from where this is occurring on the campus is really in the outdoor spaces, the courtyards, feeling like students feeling frustrated that those in many cases are inaccessible to them, or that due to their arrangement of being uncovered, not really being an environment that can be welcomed or occupied throughout the year. And you can also see here the arrow that's showing the connection, or what we should really say is distance, between the main campus and Crest. And both the challenges that sometimes creates for students who are looking to spend time and share time, access program opportunities in both campuses, and potential for making that connection stronger and more accessible and welcoming. And then finally, a little subtle on the diagram here, but the edges of our hallways are also highlighted, really indicating, if we go to the next slide, the photograph illustrates it, how the physical environment is really blocking visual access between common areas like the corridors and program or activity spaces like classrooms and maker areas. So when we look at the specific projects that could be a potential for overcoming some of these challenges, we're talking about, again, and improving that connection between Crest and the main building, looking at reconfiguring some spaces that feel really structured and limiting to flexible use. And an example there is like the choir room with its tiered seating, not providing a lot of flexibility for activities in that class. And again, in the common spaces, we're talking about improving access to the courtyards and providing covered gathering space and circulation between the wings, providing visibility between the classrooms and the hallways to break down the experience as shown in that photograph, and also just to simplify access to classrooms for club use, and this really to get at what we've heard is such a wonderful feature of the school, that students have the ability to create clubs, and we've heard that the biggest obstacle for them is finding places and spaces for them to meet. We'll go to the next slide. We're entering our final category, and what we're looking to do here is really to maximize the learning setting in order to overcome what was a category of needs identified around inflexible, inefficient, and sometimes feeling antiquated learning environments. And what we can observe through the plan diagram here is that this is a category that was identified for a lot of the teaching spaces at both the main building and at Crest. You can see, in remembering back to our utilization diagram showing what kinds of programs are running in our spaces, a lot of the core class spaces, the gen eds, are identified here, as well as those common spaces, the main administration, the performing arts center, the gym, and as we've already talked about, those locker rooms. Also brought up here are those outdoor athletic facilities, the JV field and the grandstand. So if we go to the next slide, we start to look at what those specific projects could be to overcome some of the needs that were identified. So in terms of teaching spaces, in the science classrooms in particular, we're talking about needing a better way to accommodate storage and sometimes just the configuration of that room. Throughout the building, a desire to upgrade the furniture to provide a more comfortable environment in the classrooms. In the theater, this is really looking at the acoustics, lighting, and seating just to create a better environment for the amazing performances that are happening there. Throughout, we're looking at upgrading what we call finishes, and those are the materials applied to the surfaces, like carpet, whiteboards, tackable surfaces throughout the general classrooms. We're also talking about the quality of space in terms of the access to natural light and the desire to add windows to bring that into more of the spaces. How our spaces are integrated with technology and a desire to mount the Promethean boards and add an integrated sound system into all the classrooms, which is really voice enhancement for instruction accessibility. At Crest, we heard a desire to reconfigure the large classroom and the offices that sit adjacent to it to make that space more supportive of the activities going on there and more flexible to how that program desires to run. With athletics, we're looking at, again, the finishes, including lighting and acoustics in the gym. At the stadium, a desire for stadium bathrooms or just to upgrade the stadium bathrooms and provide covered grandstands, as well as a desire to improve the JV field. In common spaces, we're looking at spaces that have built-in features that make them feel very inflexible. So one potential is to remove the step seating in the LPR within the library. And in those dining spaces, kind of touching on that other category we mentioned, but it focuses on finding alternative furniture solutions, both at the main building and the dining area at Crest. In general, the potential project to upgrade and replace the HVAC system was a theme that came up through a lot, or feedback that came up through a lot of our different engagement channels. And that is just the kind of general comfort that, or discomfort that as students, staff, and parents are bringing forward of just the variable temperatures as you move through different spaces throughout the building. Next slide shows a summary of everything that we just looked through, and the percentages here are looking just at the sheer number of potential projects that have been identified in each of these categories. What we can observe at this kind of zooming back out to this high level is that, meeting program demands, safe, accessible, utilized and resource spaces, and maximizing the learning setting. Projects in those categories kind of divide equally and take about a quarter each. And the remaining quarter is shared between those in the learning potential category and the unlocking previously hidden opportunities category. Before we look at our final section of where we're going, I just want to acknowledge that what our process has done is collected and thoroughly documented everything that we heard. So what we want to clarify is that this list is comprehensive and has not removed or reduced any of the needs brought forward through all of those communication channels. We understand that resources will have to be prioritized. And so the work we have going forward is how to really apply the lens of the guiding principles to everything that we've heard and collected in order to bring forward solutions that make sense when kind of packaged together, as larger bundles of projects, and how to prioritize within that those that will have the largest impact and really maximize what we are trying to do, and that the community has helped us chart through our guiding principles. And Claudia, take us to where we're going next.
All right. So this is the fun part. So we have been turning over every stone and every pebble. And now in the summer, we, as Becky shared at the very top of this, are going to get to start testing these projects for impact. And we're going to do a lot of work over the summer to be able to select the most viable options that we will bring forward to the school community in the fall. So, as Becky mentioned, we know there are many different potential projects to address the various needs. So, to begin our study, we wanted to understand what we're calling the factors. So these are the guiding principles. These are those categorized needs that Becky just went through in very high, fine detail. Safety and accessibility are always factoring in to our factors. The location where these projects could occur within or around the school. The condition of those spaces, when was the last time they were touched, or when we know they're going to need to be touched, if there's something there that is going to fail, that we need to know what that's going to be so we're not punting that project that needs immediate attention. And then the cost and funding streams are also factors that we're considering. What's going to happen, what needs to happen in this first round, what may be a viable option for CapTech funding is another one of those things that we will look to the leadership team to help us understand. So all of these factors move through the filter to help us understand what can be the ways that we can maximize the impact. And it's not just about a standalone project or a standalone need, it's how we can pair them together in this beautiful pairing to leverage the sometimes hard to define synergies of something that will be exponentially more impactful for your community. So it's taking all of these things to understand that if we are really strategic about how we link them together, we're going to get a lot more value out of that work. We start, as always, at looking at what were the values that came out of the community and recognizing that, like all of this, um, there is going to be that supportive tension between them that holds us honest and accountable. And this is where those community generated consensus building language really matters. And it asks us to pause and ask what we're advocating for. From there, we look at, so we're going to show you, we'll show you 3 examples of how we're building this project pairing. So the first one is if we were looking at the gym wing. So in this hypothetical project, we would look at what are some of the factors that we would link together. So from athletics, we could expand that training room, we could reconfigure the gymnastics vault. And in that work, you see the lines that are dashed. Those are things that make sense. These are those kind of hidden synergies that pop up because we are working in a space. Those are dashed. We wouldn't do it throughout the whole campus, but in the areas where we're concentrating the work. We would also look to reconfigure the locker rooms and the student storage there. And also look at Crest because we can't leave Crest off the table. As we're looking at those inclusive spaces, that makes sense to bring that across. And then updating the finishes and acoustics in the gym, and where we are working, we would look to upgrade the HVAC systems. So here we see that diagrammatically, we're trying to concentrate the area of renovation work to a single wing with a little bit of work over at Crest. The guiding principles that we look to are the ones around the comfort, the community, and those student passions, how we're addressing inclusivity and student safety, and that's why we're bringing some of that work across to Crest. And then leveraging synergies with other departments at Mercer Island for the families as well as the departments. So we know that by updating the finishes and the lighting in the gym, it's not just for athletics, it's also for those other for the band performances and things like that as well. So this is one of the ways, or an example of one of the ways that we're thinking about looking at the factors, the big impact that will have, and how we can pair together all of those potential projects to create better impact. The next one we're going to look at is the performing arts. So this is an example. We'd want to expand the instrument storage, how we can add a black box classroom. We are also showcasing that student work in the area where we are doing the work. We want to improve the workshop and storage solutions at the PAC. It makes sense if we're working there to do that. And potentially reconfigure that choir room for flexibility and future use. And this is where we would also look at improving the theater acoustics, lighting, and seating. And also, like we shared at the gym, this would be an opportunity for us to look at the HVAC systems in that performing arts zone. So this is not as confined to just the gym wing. It starts to spread across into the 500 wing. It's not just the pack itself. And we see that the factors, the guiding principles that would that would nudge us to explore this kind of a project are, again, those personalized passions, that innovation, thinking differently about flexible spaces, and that community where we are inviting the community in. We're providing safe access to props, materials, and tools. We could create flexible gathering and performing space, whether that is in the repurposing of the reconfiguring of that choir room, or where we're able to put in a black box space. And then aligning the materials and the equipment, like the parents told us, to the caliber and quality of the program that is coming out of the fine arts and performing arts spaces. And the last example that we wanted to share is a little bit harder to quantify, but these are those shared learning spaces. These are those soft, comfortable spaces that we heard from the students and the teachers. So it's when we would go in and reconfigure some of those teachers' offices and support spaces and add those shared learning and small group spaces for independent work. This is also an opportunity for us to showcase student work and put up those areas of display. This is where we would reconfigure the commons to provide that more welcoming and scaled environment. We would look at how we can really leverage those courtyards for circulation as well as for gathering spaces. And in all of this shifting around of the administrative spaces and common spaces, we're able to find easier way to access some of those classrooms for club use. This is where we would look at the work at Crest to reconfigure that large classroom and also upgrade the furniture in both of those dining experiences. So from a plan perspective, the factors here, the guiding principles that draw us, this kind of hits on all of them, right? It lets you touch on the community. It really addresses the notions of comfort. It really gets at those personalized connection points, as well as really taking advantage and of those spaces that are just currently sitting there underutilized. So the beauty of this is it creates benefits for everybody, for the students and the staff. We'd look at how we could activate and optimize those underutilized and inaccessible spaces around the courtyards, and how then we could position potentially those teacher workspaces and those accessible club spaces to have access to the commons and the corridors, and create throughways, new pathways through and around the building, and then provide those new missing space types, those soft spaces, those corners, so that we can relieve the pressure on the booths and the alcoves in the corridors here. So these are three of the examples, and the work that we'll be doing over the summer is continuing to link together other ways of pairing projects together so that we're able to knock off every single one of the ones on the list and know that they are accommodated in one way or another. And in doing that, we're going to be able to get real cost, understand what are the kind of gravity constraints like structure and whatnot that might make some of these things more challenging or not. And really challenge ourselves to think outside of what we think we know, because we have rooted our discovery in the deep knowledge and lived experience of your community. So with that, we want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, so that we can have a really robust conversation with you all in person on the 20th.
Thank you.
Thank you.